Workplace issues and depression is one of the topics that will be discussed at the Naomi Ruth Cohen Mental Health Conference. And with me tonight is Richard Rothberg, who is with Jewish Vocational Services, one of the sponsors of the conference. Welcome, Richard.
Nice to be here.
Can you tell us about JVS and what it does briefly?
JVS is a non-sectarian agency. We have been in the community for 125 years. We serve a very broad, diverse population of individuals with employment problems, and that includes people with mental illness as well as people who are executive level, career changers, dislocated workers, people with disabilities, very broad spectrum of individuals.
Well, work certainly is an important aspect of our lives. What do we lose if we lose our jobs?
Well, work is an important part of life, and Freud said most famously the two most important things in life are love and work. He didn't say very much more about love, but he talked a lot about work. No, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. He said a lot about love, but he didn't talk much about work, and I like to sensitize people to the importance of work in our lives by asking them to think about how much time and energy and effort to prepare for work, to find work, how much time we put into employment all week long, how hard we work at it, and then when they've sort of added all that up, to balance that against how much time and effort they put into love. And I think most people come out with the formula that work is a very heavy part of our lives. And when we lose work, when we lose employment, we lose a lot of things. The first thing that comes to mind, of course, is the economic self-sufficiency and stability that we lose when we no longer have a paycheck. But work also provides structure, it provides community, it provides socialization, it provides productivity, and for many people it provides their very identity. When you go to a social event and you don't know people, first you talk about a little of the event, and then you talk a little bit what your name, and then what's the next thing? It's what do you do? And when we ask somebody what they do, it tells us a little bit about who they are, about their education, about their socioeconomic status. So there's a great many parts of our lives that are involved in employment. And when it's lost, it's a calamity for a lot of people.
Richard, what's the particular impact for people with depression when they lose a job?
I think about that. There are many people who lose jobs who are then described as having become depressed. There are a lot of people who lose jobs and aren't depressed. And I think in working with people for more than 40 years around these problems, I think there are a lot of depressed people who work very well. They function very well because work is in itself therapy. And I think many of those people, when they lose employment, become, quotes, depressed. But they may have already been depressed. And when you lose employment, even if you're not depressed, it's a pretty big impact. If you know anybody who's lost a job, it's not the best feeling in the world. You lose a lot of self-esteem. If you're depressed, it's a double-barreled attack on your persona.
How about a person who has depression when they're searching for a job? How does that work?
The hardest job, I think, in the world is to look for a job. And it's very much like walking up a steep hill. But if you also have a depression, it's walking up the same steep hill with a refrigerator on your back. It's just an added and much heavier burden than it is for people without a depression, for whom it is also a very difficult process.
Do men affected with depression have special fears associated with job loss?
I think they do. I think that men in our I think men in our culture tend to have only one real role in life, and that's their work. And when they lose it, it's very difficult for them to find another role. You heard already from guests earlier about how men will self-medicate to avoid talking about the problem. I think it drives depressed people further into a depression when they're looking for work. It's very hard to look for work anyway. It's very hard to sell yourself when you're really down. Selling yourself in a job interview is all about your confidence and how you can project yourself. And if you're very depressed, that's a very hard task.
Should a person with depression tell a potential employer?
I think there are a lot of factors involved in that. I wouldn't recommend doing that without very carefully evaluating the culture of the company. If it's a company that has a company culture of support, an employee assistance program, if it's a company that hires people with disabilities that are recognized, if it's a company that can make accommodations. Depressed people often have difficulty getting up in the morning, for example, so flexible hours would be an accommodation. But I wouldn't recommend that an individual disclose depression unless the company culture really would accept it. I think it makes you extremely vulnerable, and in a job market like we have today, companies will use that as an excuse to sort of clean house. They're firing lots of people anyway. It makes it much easier to fire people with disabilities, so I would be cautious.
And Richard, what steps can a person take to keep themselves functioning well when they're suffering from depression during a job search?
You know, I've seen a great many people in a job search who stretch out all day long the job search. If they have to write a resume or put a letter in the mail or make a phone call, it takes them a half an hour to sharpen the pencil and then another half an hour to find the paper. This is very bad. And when I work with people with a depression, or actually anybody, and I ask them to figure out how much time they need to really do the job of looking for work in a particular day, making the few phone calls, getting a resume into the mail, doesn't take a long time. And I ask people to pack it together, get it done right away. Don't stretch it out all day. The reason they stretch it out all day is that when they're done, there's emptiness. So I put them to work. You fill the day. If it's a few hours, all you need to look for a job, you do that. And then you work out, you go out and you volunteer. If you have a hobby, you get reconnected with the hobby. You have to give something back to yourself, because looking for employment, especially in this job market, is like drawing on emotional savings account. You're running that account down, and in order to keep your balance, you have to put something back in. So it's a very good idea to stay fit, to get out and go for a walk, to volunteer, give something back, put some structure in the rest of your day. Don't just stretch it all out to write one resume. It's a disaster.
Well, that seems like good advice for anyone
It's worked for many people.
to remain mentally healthy.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about your discussion group that you'll be doing at the conference.
Well, Maxine Topper and Maxine Topper is a counselor and supervisor of counseling at JVS. We'll be conducting a discussion group on find a job and keep a job for people who have some depression. And we think it'll be interesting. I hope we'll have a number of social workers and psychologists, because I don't think they get enough of a sense of what's involved emotionally in the job search.
Well, I think you'll have both, because the conference is both for professionals as well as consumers. Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight, Richard.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thanks for being here.